Good evening, and welcome again to Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. And as you know, we always try to bring you interesting guests, people who have a wide variety of interests in their life. And so tonight, we're bringing you, once again, an elected official, but someone who has much more going on in her life than that. Jackie Traynere. Jackie, welcome to the show. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you, Kevin. It's wonderful to be here.
So let's start with the elected official part. You are a current member of the Will County Board of Commissioners.
Yes.
For those who aren't familiar with county government, what does the county board do?
Well, we're even more unique as a county board than other county boards. We run under what's called the executive style of government. There are 102 counties in Illinois, and we are the only ones under that executive style of government.
My, how did you manage that?
I'm not entirely sure. It happened before I came along. I want to say maybe about 12 years ago. The county actually voted to make that change. The board made that change.
And what
in
does
the
it do?
residents. Well, we actually have an elected county board executive, and he's elected at large by the entire county, which is a little different than most counties. Most counties have board members, and then those board members from within their political caucuses choose a leader, and that leader is not elected countywide. Well, we have that function, but we also have a county executive that runs so we have like the three branches of government. We have the executive, similar to the executive branch. We have the legislative branch, which is the board, and then of course we have the judges and the sheriff and all that.
Now, as opposed to, say, Cook County, where the president of the board is actually elected separately and countywide, but she's the president of the board. She's not like an executive director, for example.
Correct.
So you're talking about an actual executive authority, like the CEO is essentially elected.
Yes.
And is not a member of the board, or is an ex officio member of the board?
No, not a member of the board.
all.
No, he presents a budget every year, similar to the president or a governor. And then the board actually either tweaks that budget, makes it their own, and then passes it for the entire county. So that budget is the funding mechanism that runs our sheriff facility, our county jail, our public health facility, and our medical clinic. It also runs I guess you would call them the ministerial offices, the recorder of deeds for property throughout the county, the auditor, the treasurer's office, and then the clerk at the circuit court who keeps track of all of the records.
Those are not separately elected offices?
They're all separately elected, but the county board controls the finances of those organizations. And for example, the courthouse, we just took out a very large loan. We bonded out for, I think the total was up to 275 million.
Okay.
And today we had a meeting to talk about the cost of the new courthouse, the judicial complex. That is the county board's responsibility to provide a workplace for the judges.
Sure.
And we had a space issue in Will County. We had space for more judges based on population, but not physical space for more judges to actually have a courtroom. And that's been a little bit of a problem for a while because Will County had such a huge growth in population over the last 20 years. We were the fastest growing county in the country, I think, at one point.
And so, we talk about justice delayed is justice denied. And
Correct.
So if you can't even get a courtroom, then you're not really being served properly, right?
Correct. Correct. So it's exciting. We are entering into this. I don't know the exact date we would break ground, but I think prior to January of next year.
And that whole $275 million is going to go to courtroom.
Well, that's what we talked about today. We had initially tried to keep the courthouse to $195 million, but we've realized it's going to cost a little bit more, just based on the fact that we need more courtrooms, and these are what things cost. And we're doing a very modest facility, still in downtown Joliet, across the street literally from where the current facility is I think it was opened in 1970. And our population at that time was about 1/4 of what it is today, probably even less than 1/4.
And it's interesting, you would think, 1970, that's pretty recent, but if the population has quadrupled, it's just not enough.
It's not enough. So we decided, I think today, although it's not official yet, but it looks like we're probably going to spend somewhere in the neighborhood of $215 to $220 million. We just are in the process the final throes of building a new public safety complex. We built a new jail some years ago, the jail expansion. In fact, one of the first things that I did when I was elected to the county board was go to the ribbon cutting for the new facility. So.
And you've been on the board now 10 years, right? Or coming up
8
on
years. I'm going on my most recent term is another 2 years, and so when I complete this term, it'll be 10.
10, yes. And at that point?
I don't know if I'll stay any longer. You know, we talked a little bit before the show. I don't believe that politicians should be a lifetime in the same position. I just don't think that's good for the organization. Fresh blood, fresh ideas, I think are an important part. And, you know, we don't always rely on our voters to vote people out.
Right.
Because they get comfortable, as evidenced by my community. We've had the same mayor for 31 years.
And
so,
we'll get to that in just a minute.
so I just think 10 years is long enough, and I think maybe it'll be time to move on.
Well, and I applaud that because, like you, I agree. I think that public service is not a lifetime entitlement. It's something that one does in order to contribute back to the community you live in. And at some point, you're right. I mean, at some point, and everyone gets tired after a while. And you start thinking in the same way. And you're right. You may think, oh, but I always know the right answer. We always think we do. But, you know, it's just not true. And having someone new come in with a completely different perspective is so helpful. And especially if we think about state government, where we've had the same people in power for a long time. And, you know, sometimes you just need a turnover to get people thinking differently, right?
Agreed. Agreed. And I'm not going to wait for somebody to implement
tell you,
and tell me.
Your time's up.
I'm just going to tell the world that my time in that position is up.
So let's talk for a minute about your run for mayor of Bolingbrook recently, because you came within a hair's breadth, didn't you?
Yes, less than a half a percentage point, and it was a very quickly put together campaign. We were, I would say, spurred to do this by the fact that our mayor of our community invited Donald Trump to our publicly funded golf club for a fundraiser. Raised him a lot of money, 1.5 million, some large amount of money. And there were a number of us in the community were already ready for a new mayor. We've been ready for a while.
He's been there, you said,
31 years. Yeah. That's a long time. And no matter what he did in the beginning of his term, I think the person who is in that office now is not the same elected official that was elected 31 years ago, for the reasons that you just mentioned. And so when Donald Trump won the presidency, there were a group of people in our community that said, you know, our mayor helped that happen, and yet our community voted for his opponent. 67% of the people in Bolingbrook voted for Hillary Clinton.
So 2 to 1, essentially.
2 to 1. And so, you know, there were a lot of people there not happy about the outcome, and they decided that it was time to find a new candidate for mayor. They found me.
You just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Pretty much. So I agreed to do this literally on the heels of being reelected to the county board. It was not something that I was planning to do. And we put our campaign together in a slate of candidates to support myself very quickly. We raised $150,000 in less than 9 weeks.
That's remarkable.
Yeah, well, we had really good inspiration in the White House.
Yeah.
And put there in part by our mayor. But that was just the catalyst.
Yeah.
The real issues were the amount of debt that our community is in. You know, I mentioned we have $275 million worth of bonding authority at the county.
Right.
The county is 700,000 700,000 residents. We have a huge tax base, huge tax base. We did that without raising any property tax whatsoever. Those bonds will be paid for without any increase in property tax.
That's remarkable.
The village of Bolingbrook is in debt really to the tune of almost $400 million. All exclusively backed by property tax. And that's the debt today. 2 years ago, the debt was only $180 million. So we're seeing this debt
$220 million increase.
Double, yeah, when you count the pension liabilities, the post-employment benefits, and the bonded money. We're talking almost $400 million in debt.
that's astonishing. So is the city of Bolingbrook is going into debt in order to fund pension liabilities?
That's only about $50 million,
Only?
believe it or not, between the police and fire. The big debt is things like the public golf club. It's in a very expensive, very fancy place. It's frequently referred to as the Raj Mahal. Some of us now want to call it Clare-Lago for Roger Clark, but you know, it's very expensive. Last year alone, $14 million, actually I think it was 2012, $14 million went toward the golf club.
But it's a private club? It's a
No,
public club?
it's a publicly funded golf club. And so
could that money be spent better elsewhere? Like, do
Well,
you need that level of public
correct.
golf course, right?
You know, when you look at the per capita income, the type of people that live in Bolingbrook, what their recreational habits are, that's a really expensive firework lawn, because that's what we use it for mainly. That's what the majority of the community comes together on 4th of July to watch the fireworks. That's where that facility gets its most use from the residents, because it's free.
Yeah.
The rest of the time, it's very expensive. It takes about $17 million a year to operate it. The year I started to mention, 2012, $14 million more than what the village gave to our public school systems. And we have 5 school districts in our town. So the little bit of money that our village gave to the schools, $14 million more went to the golf club.
So what's the justification? What, the other side, there's always people who support that kind of spending.
Well,
So what's the argument?
Yeah, you talked about how elected officials can lose sight.
Yes, it
That's
happens.
pretty much what has happened. There was no public referendum for that golf club. This was a decision made by the mayor of Bolingbrook without any input from the residents. And a lot of money was spent, and the club continually loses money every year. It's been open for about 12 years now, I think. Never turned a significant profit in any of those years. Continually has lost money. We've got other, I call them boondoggles in our community. We have a publicly owned airport that loses money every year. We own a subdivision.
The village, the city.
The village of Bolingbrook owns a subdivision
Why?
because the mayor wanted to.
Okay. So, so there hasn't been sufficient citizen oversight, it sounds like.
None.
Yeah.
No, he controls everybody on the board. When someone is ready to give up being on the board, they step down, he picks someone, replaces them.
So you always run as incumbent.
Everyone runs as an incumbent, and they are all fully funded by our mayor, who's raised over $8 million from the businesses in our community during his time in office to make sure he stays in office.
So why do the businesses like him?
Well, he does things for them. You know, stoplights appear where they'd like them to appear. You know, different things happen, tax incentives, just a variety of different things. And there's a large portion of Bolingbrook that feels that has gotten out of hand, as evidenced by the election, the fact that it was so close.
So if 2/3 of the of Bolingbrook voters were Hillary fans, I understand you only had 9 weeks, but how could you have captured just a few more?
Yes, one more weekend is probably all we needed,
Yeah.
really. You know, it's very hard to put a grassroots campaign together that quickly.
Yeah.
You know, you're talking wintertime. We were out gathering signatures in snowstorms. Holidays, we had Thanksgiving, we had Christmas, we had New Year's. All slight impediments to putting a campaign together quickly.
Yeah, it's one of the issues that I hear often with the municipal elections being held in April, early April, and the primary, if there is a primary, in February. Yeah, it's the worst time of year.
Yes.
I mean, even we think about presidential elections or gubernatorial, they happen in November. So you've got the summer to work on. You've got good weather to be walking door to door. But in municipals, it's the opposite. You're out there in the worst weather, the worst time of year.
So true. So true. We were very blessed this year. We had phenomenal weather, all things considered. We had a few weeks of rather cold, rainy weather, but virtually no snow.
It's that global warming thing that's not happening.
Not happening.
Right.
Well, actually, I think there are some that believe we have global warming and climate change. They just don't agree on how it
And
was.
who's responsible?
Who's
Is it- yes,
responsible.
Is it just a fluctuation in the natural history of the planet, or is it really human intervention? That's
Correct.
That's right. So another interesting thing that you do that I think is fascinating is that you're a union organizer as well
Yes.
for the federal government workers. Right?
Yes, I am. I've worked for the American Federation of Government Employees for 22 years now, 20 of those years as an organizer. It's an open shop environment, so people are not required to join the union. We had a brand new agency stood up during my time at the union, the Transportation Security Administration. We organized all of those workers after, I think after a year after the agency had been open. We gave them a year to get open and see if their employees were going to be happy the way things were, and clearly they weren't. So, but we go to VA hospitals, Social Security offices, Department of Defense bases.
So any federal entity?
Any federal entity that, you know, where it's not a contracted out situation, where they actually work for the federal government. And we talk to them about their rights and their ability to lobby their member of Congress. Because unlike most employers, they don't negotiate with a boss.
Well,
You have Congress that dictates the terms of their employment and their wages and their benefits.
So every union, your union for every one of these things has to negotiate with Congress?
Well, we negotiate with the head of the agency, but Congress determines the budget, which in reality determines the working conditions. So we negotiate the working conditions, but Congress, through its budget making, decides what those are really going to be.
Sure. Well, if I take the example of TSA, the Transportation Security Administration, sure, they're funded by Congress. There's a head of the agency, and the actual negotiation process will take place there. But then the head of the agency can only negotiate based on the budget, the funds that are made available by Congress.
Correct.
And if Congress decides, well, we're not going to fund these guys.
That's
now,
it.
That brings up an interesting question. If you know, Congress has to pass a budget every year, unlike the state of Illinois, who decides when they're going to pass a budget and when they won't. But Congress passes the budget every year, but union contracts tend to be multi-year, 3-year, 4-year. So what would happen if, for example, a federal agency had a contract in place, and once the contract was in place, then Congress decided to cut the budget, and the money in that contract was no longer available? What prevails, Congress passing the budget or contract law?
Well, there is a little kind of a quirk with federal employees, even with the agencies. The agency doesn't directly negotiate the wages. That is Congress. So the employees can lobby Congress about their own pay raise, about their own health care, about their own benefits. The agency controls like the day-to-day operations. So if there is a government shutdown, which we've had since I've been working for the union, we've had multiple ones, then the workers come to work and there's no guarantee of pay. So that's kind of an interesting scenario.
Kind of a demotivator, wouldn't you say?
Very much so. Federal employees, the way Congress kicks them around, it can be rather negative. I mean, there are at least one agency that's really at the bottom of the heap, and that you mentioned, Department of Homeland Security, the Transportation Security Administration. Those employees, their morale is probably the lowest in the federal government, and it's because they've been treated the poorest. They don't have full collective bargaining rights. They don't have a voice, per se, in a lot of the issues that happen at work.
And is that as a result of the legislation that created the agency?
Yes.
So there were limits placed on it?
There were limits placed on it, and yet that agency is one of the ones with the lowest morale. So
where we placed some of the highest level of trust,
yes,
right?
Exactly. So it's interesting, the decisions that Congress makes. And they did make the decision that workers being able to organize and bargain collectively is in the public interest, so that they're not afraid to blow the whistle on any things which we saw in the VA facilities about a year ago. Actually, I think it's been almost 2 years now, where some doctors came forward and staff came forward to talk about wait list issues. So yeah, it's in the public interest, but Congress didn't make it so that they would have to pay union dues. And so it's an open shop environment. So I spend a lot of time educating the workers on why the union is good for them, why it's beneficial. We're probably one of the only unions where that happens.
Well, and it's because I've had other union organizers on the show, so I know this is a key point of contention between really the political right and the political left. And the right seems to feel that being forced to pay union dues is an undue burden on workers. And that's what these right-to-work, I'm sure you're familiar, right-to-work laws say, well, I can work and I don't have to pay union dues. But essentially that bankrupts the union because it's the free rider problem. The union negotiates on everyone's behalf, but if theoretically no one pays the union dues, which could happen, then the union has no ability to represent those workers.
Right, exactly.
So is that the argument that you have to make about
That is absolutely the argument that I make. Ours is the only union, I think, in the entire labor movement that's had consistently grown every single year for the last 20 years. Unlike most labor unions, which are shrinking, or if they're growing, it's because they have merged with another union. Our union continues to grow, and we've done no mergers.
Is that just because the number of federal employees grows,
No.
or is it a percentage?
Our percentage is growing. Number of federal employees is extremely low. Lower probably than when President Kennedy was in office, and a lot of that is due to automation.
Sure.
But here's what I would say to the employee that doesn't want to pay union dues. Find another job in a location where there is no union. Because at its height, only 30% or less, right around that number, of workers in this country were represented by labor. Today the number is much smaller. When you add government workers, it's about 11%. If you take them out, I think it's 6 or 7%.
Yeah, 7, I think, is the number I've heard. So.
And you know, there's nothing saying you have to go to work for an organization that has a union. There are plenty of other jobs out there, I promise you.
Well, and what people, I think, don't recognize about unions is that it raises wages for everyone, even shops that are not unionized.
Correct.
So the example was always the auto industry back in its heyday, when the wages set by the United Auto Workers affected wages in industries outside of the auto industry. Because what employees realize is, gee, I can go get a job as an auto worker at this really substantial wage, or I can work somewhere else where they pay less. So the other companies, other industries have to raise wages in order to meet the competition. And actually the interesting thing about that is it's a free market model because it creates competition for workers.
Correct.
Whereas by dissolving the unions or weakening them to the extent they've been weakened, it's a race to the bottom.
Correct. And that's where we're at. We're all on a race to be the lowest paid worker. It's a wrong direction to be going in. I always thought up was a good direction, down's a bad direction.
Well, you know, you can see I've had these conversations before.
Yes.
That Henry Ford famously said that he had to pay his workers enough to buy his own cars.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what we lose sight of, that the people who make the least will spend every extra dollar that they're paid, and that goes into the economy.
Correct.
It's, Paul Krugman, who writes for the
I love him. He's good.
Yes, he says, my expenditure is your income.
Correct.
And your expenditure is my income. So if you can't spend money, I can't make money.
And speaking of that, you know, we talked a little bit about my business that I own. When the economy tanked in 2009, we lost 1/3 of our customers overnight.
Wow. And that's you have a cleaning business, right? That cleans homes and also industrial?
No, just residential homes. And so when the economy went south at the end of 2008 through mid-2009, when really the recession was hitting people really, really hard, yeah, we lost a lot of customers. And because if you don't have the wages to pay, then the first service you're going to cut is your luxury cleaning service. You're going to clean your own toilet.
Yes, because you won't spend money that you don't have to spend.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah, so I think it's the great fallacy of driving wages to the bottom that ultimately it stalls the economy.
It does.
Right?
It does.
So does this carry weight when you're out talking to the federal employees?
Some, yes, some. I would say there's probably 1/3 of the people that I talk to, they're already predisposed based on how they were raised, their ladder of inference, to hate unions, to only care about the individual's achievement, and to make judgments about their coworkers without having necessarily all the insight and all the facts, just based on, you know, their perceptions. And so they start judging their coworkers, say, well, you know, we all get paid the same, and that's not fair because Johnny doesn't work as hard as I do. I get, you know, I do much more work than Johnny does. And, you know, if a rising tide lifts all ships.
Yeah.
Is the concept. You're all going to have a day where you're
Yeah.
having a bad day,
Sure.
and somebody's going to pick up your load, and there are going to be days when you pick up somebody's load, they're going to pick up your load. It
And the
just
other thing I'll
works.
point out, having managed union shops,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not as a, I mean, I was on management side
Sure.
working with union, is that there are always rules in these contracts that allow for discipline. If someone is genuinely not doing the job, there are ways that management can take care of that. And in all of my, I've been on the other side of negotiations with unions in a number of times, and my experience is that unions don't want to support the freeloaders either.
No.
The unions want their workers, because it, what's the advertising campaign? Look for the union label.
Correct.
Because you know it's high quality,
Correct.
right? And so it's in the union's own interest, best interest, to make sure that the union members are doing a good job.
That's correct.
And I think we lose sight of that sometimes.
Yeah, people forget. Again, they start thinking about the individual instead of the larger collective group. And I spend a lot of time talking to folks about that.
Well, before we only have a few minutes left, so I do want to talk about your cleaning business, because one of the things that struck me is that you have a service for people who have had cancer or have cancer and are unable to do the house cleaning themselves.
That's correct.
And how did that get, that's such a cool thing to do, how did that get started?
Well, we look as a business owner in the community for opportunities to give back. And we heard about this organization called Cleaning for a Reason, and we joined. And what we do is if there's someone in the community that we service that has cancer, is going through chemotherapy, and is finding it difficult to keep their own house maintained, they can call us up, apply for the program through Cleaning for a Reason, and we will offer them, I think it's 4 free house cleanings while they're going through their treatment. And it's just a small way to give back. We do other things too. Right now we've got a food pantry drive going on. We're collecting food from our customers to drop off at the local food pantry, but we try to do things, to give back to the community.
Well, I think in particular, having that experience with family members with cancer, that it is very difficult, even for the additional family members who are dealing with the person who's so ill. And chemotherapy, as anyone who's been around it knows, is pretty debilitating. I mean, there's various levels, but it can be extremely debilitating. And so the idea of being able to do this is really significant. I mean, what would be the criteria for, I mean, you apply, and why would you get accepted or not?
Oh, pretty much, I think anybody that applies gets accepted.
Yeah.
We have a limit. I think we only are doing 4 customers a week.
Yeah.
So there's a limit.
There's a capacity issue.
Yeah, there's a capacity issue. But we have enjoyed participating in the program, and we think it's beneficial. It's hard.
Is it limited just to cancer, or are there any kind of debilitating illness that?
This program, Cleaning for a Reason, is just cancer-based, sure.
Yeah.
And, it's like you said, you could have other household members that are just as affected by this. They may not be having the actual symptoms, but they're the ones that maybe are the caregivers and have to do, the extra medical appointments and do the driving and monitor the medicines and now pick up extra chores around the house. And even if it's only picking up the dry cleaning and the grocery shopping and paying the bills, all of a sudden you've added a whole list of tasks. So if you can get any help at all, any relief, it just makes you feel good.
Yeah, I know that even just the emotional support of dealing with something like that can be very draining. And so you just might not have the energy as one of the caregivers to be able to say, okay, I'm going to vacuum the entire house today. You just may not be able to do it.
No,
right?
Not at all.
Well, I really want to thank you for being on the show. You have such an interesting range of activities that you engage in.
We didn't even touch on my philanthropical ones.
Well,
I serve on a couple of boards.
Then you'll have to come back. That's how.
Thank you, Kevin.
Well, thank you, Jackie. It's been a pleasure to meet you and to talk with you.
Thanks.
And thank you for joining us once again on Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. You can find us every Saturday night at 8 on Comcast Channel 19 and see us on the web at publicperspective.tv. So until next time, thank you and good night.